the biggest problem is not what people say, it's actually what they don't say, it's what they leave out. And what I have found is when you really get people to say the unsaid said in a non-blaming way, you can almost resolve any issue. In fact, I've had many people over the years that say, well, I'll try to work with this person, but I don't think I can work with this person. And I'm like, that's nonsense. You can work with anyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mindful Management. We're super excited that you're tuning in still with us each and every time. I'm excited today to introduce you to our guest. It's a privilege to have Steven Gaffney with us. He's a renowned expert in building high-achieving teams and leadership excellence. With over 30 years of experience, Steven has worked with top companies like Amazon, Marriott, and NASA, helping organizations thrive through effective leadership and communication. He's the founder of the Steven Gaffney Company, and he's authored several books on leadership and team success, including his latest, Unconditional Power, Thriving in Any Situation, No Matter How Frustrating, Complex, or Unpredictable. I'm sure there's no leaders who can feel frustration in a leadership role ever. Today, we're going to discuss some of his insights from his recent study on remote work and its impact on team dynamics. Steven, welcome. We're so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me on the show. Your show, especially.
I appreciate that, Steven. And you've worked with countless top leaders, organizations over the years. What's been maybe the most surprising insight you've gained about what truly makes a team effective?
The key is honest communication. Now, when I say honest communication, people often hear that as maybe about truth or lies, but that's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a particular type of honest communication, and that is the biggest problem is not what people say, it's actually what they don't say, it's what they leave out.
Yes.
And what I have found is when you really get people to say the unsaid said in a non-blaming way, you can almost resolve any issue. In fact, I've had many people over the years that say, well, I'll try to work with this person, but I don't think I can work with this person. And I'm like, that's nonsense. You can work with anyone. And really, if you know these skill sets, which we can talk about, but I'm a big believer that really any relationship can be fixed. And can I say something in particular about this? Because the reason why is it reminds me of this example that really probably will hit it home. I was doing a session some years ago, and the guy said to me, do you think that all relationships can be fixed? In other words, resolved. And I said, well, yes. And he said, well, I don't believe so. And my response to him was, well, how's that working for you?
Yes.
And it stopped.
It's a great question.
Well, because if we believe that relationships, not all relationships can be fixed, we're going to start to develop excuses. And I get tired of people developing excuses when you can work with anyone and you can resolve almost any issue. And the truth is, do I know that you can resolve any issue? No, but I have that perspective because it keeps me going.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece that you say with that question, right? So we had Chuck Weisner on the show maybe 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about, one, the inside conversation, the thing that you're thinking about in your head, but you don't actually say out loud, which is a little bit of what you were saying there, Steven, right? Like it's the things we don't say sometimes. But the other thing about that, how's that working for you piece is Chuck talks about that around storytelling. Like there's a power in storytelling, but we also tell ourselves stories. So if I tell my story, there's nothing, Steven, you and I can do about our relationship. We just can't, this can't happen. I will begin to fulfill that in all kinds of ways, right? And I'll make sure that you fulfill it in all kinds of ways. I don't like the way you chew. I don't like the way you're sitting in that chair. I don't like the way, right? And none of that can be resolved. There's no way that we can fix that and move forward and talk about that. And so I think it's a really interesting piece when we talk about what's the story I'm telling myself about this team, about this leader, about this colleague, about this partner, this whoever, my neighbor, whoever. I'm telling myself lots of stories about my neighbor, Steven, so forgive me there. What does that mean? And how does my ego living out in that story that I'm telling, right? And how does that get in the way of being effective in the teams that I'm on?
I love that you're bringing it up because the key part about a story is we forget that we made up the story. It's not a fact.
Right.
The reality is, like, some people tell themselves a story about other people. I can't trust that person, or that person's disrespectful. But what are the facts? There's only three things that you can ever really notice about a human being. They're major categories, that is: appearance, words, and actions. Everything else we just make up in our head. The problem is people forget that they made it up and then they think it's the truth. So some years ago, remember I was saying about the 9-step formula? One of the steps was I developed an exercise that proved to people that most of what they think about on a daily basis is incorrect. In fact, we're more likely to be wrong than right. And people say, but that's not true, I'm right about it. But the mind tends to search for confirmation. And we don't remember all the times that we're really wrong. And so I developed this exercise that proves to people that they come to that conclusion where they realize that they're more likely to be wrong than right. So people then say, well, my gosh, well, that helps me, or that hurts my confidence. I said, I want you to have confidence, but driven from the facts, not from the story or the imagination that we make up. So what do we need to do? We need to go ask people, inquire, why did you do that? What's the root cause of that? What can we do better? We have to have dialogue with people instead of making up stories all the time and forget that we made it up.
Correct.
And so if I'm not really open-minded, it's not really going to take effect. And one of the things I've realized over the years is people talk about their truth and working through issues, but what they don't talk enough about is the mindset impact on those issues. For example, have you ever met somebody that they're always having problems, and they're just saying, well, I'm just telling you how I feel. I'm just telling you about the issue, but they're always having issues. And so somewhere in there, they're looking through the world, or their lens, you're looking through at the world, that where's the problem, I can't trust people and whatnot. And they forget that that's the case, versus other people acknowledge, and one of the 12 essential elements of a consistently high achieving team, which we can get to, which is assume and presume actually best intent. And so in other words, if I go into with that presumption, and I actually use the word presumption rather than assumption. Assumption means in the face of no evidence. Presumption means what's likely based on evidence. And based on evidence, people are generally going to work trying to do the best they can. So if
it's a really important point, though. That right there is a really important point. It's one that I make a lot in training, which is people aren't laying in bed thinking, how can I make everyone miserable at work tomorrow? Leaders aren't doing it. Your colleagues aren't doing it. It's a really important point, though. Like I'm not saying there's not an outlier somewhere in the workforce somewhere, but most of us are like, I want to do the best job I can do.
Yes. And that's important, because I've been at this almost 30 years, and I never met an employee who said, listen, don't tell anyone. I'm trying to screw it up here.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody. And people will say, well, I know about people who do screw it up. I say, yes, but that's not their intention. And I always say, presume best intent doesn't mean ignoring the issue. It means you can confront the issue, but with the presumption, with the tone, which is 5 times the impact of the words we say, tone, that they mean well, but the behavior is the problem, and we got to do something about the behavior.
So you were talking about questions there, and I'm going to kind of backtrack us a little bit there, which is asking a question from the intent that you might be wrong. And I want to revisit that, because one of the things I talk about is ask more curious questions. Stop making statements and just ask more questions, right? If something seems really obvious to you, ask a question anyway, because you're bound to find out information you didn't have. But you said something in there, which was ask it from the point of being wrong. And tell us more about that, Steven, because I think that I'm having my own little aha of like, how would I tweak my own practice just hearing that statement, versus sometimes I ask a question because it's based in more of a tell me more, because what you're saying makes absolutely no sense to me. But I say that because it's like, I know that there's a right answer and that's clearly not it, right? And I'll just use something crazy like the world is flat. Oh, okay, Steven, tell me more, right? It's like but if I come from this place of like, I'm probably wrong on my assumption, what would I ask instead? Or what would that look like instead?
So if our mindset has that perspective, our tone is going to be different, and we'll be coming from a different position. So that's one thing. The best way to sum it up is just be curious. Like, wow, that's interesting. Why did they behave that way? So often I coach leadership teams and they're saying, well, employees are thinking this or that. And it's like, well, how do you know that? And we have to challenge things that consultants say that are just not true. Let me give you an example. People don't like change. That's ridiculous. And I can prove it very simply. How many of us have gotten married, got divorced, sought a promotion, changed jobs or whatever, or moved? Very often, those things are things that we chose because we thought it was actually a good move for us. So therefore, and they're major changes. So if human beings really didn't like change, we'd never grow up. We'd never move forward. We wouldn't do anything different. We do like change. So why do people resist change? They resist what they perceive as a bad change. Why would they persist as a bad change? Because a lot of research supports that 70% of organizational changes fail to achieve their original objective, which means that most people have had a bad experience of change. But the good news is, I've worked with executives and leadership teams, is if you create a better business case and show that it's in their interest authentically and truthfully, then people will come along. So people don't resist change, they resist what they perceive as bad change. We have to challenge those assumptions. Yes, so the main focus of which a subset was about remote, which we'll get
Yeah.
to. The main focus was around teams. So consistently high achieving teams. So the main focus is around consistently high achieving teams. And people are welcome to the study. So if you want a copy of the study, please email us directly at justbehonest.com. There's a place for us to contact justbehonest.com and then get a copy of the study. So there are a lot of things that came out. One of them was around remote workplace. And here's what we found out. When employees have worked remotely and they've also worked in the office, they say that being in the office is more effective. 69% of them say that. That's a pretty important statistic. And if you think about it, we can understand how when you're face to face with somebody, you're in the presence of another human being, things just are better. Now, does that mean that there's never a place for remote or hybrid? Absolutely. I'm not saying that at all. There is a place for that. But it's important that we do bring people together. There's important reasons to have a conference. There's important things to bring all the leaders together, maybe from all over the world, for certain meetings. So it's, again, nothing in an extreme, but this reminds us how it's really effective to be in the presence of another human being.
And is that because of connection and relationships?
I believe so. And I think that probably there's a lot of things, but when you really look at it, I mean, when you see your friend, do you want to just sit there over the phone and or do video? Maybe, but occasionally, isn't it great to get together? Isn't it great to share a meal? So I think that's why I was often when challenged when people said in COVID, oh, this is going to change and people are never going to want to come back. That's just nonsense. Just notice when the restrictions were lifted, people wanted to see each other and be in the presence. In fact, we crave that. I think also a lot of people were hurt during that period when they were separated from people in a way that I think we're going to see the effects later on, if not now. But the point being is, how is it relevant as a leader? It's relevant because you want to bring people together. It's important, at least at times.
I love that. I mean, for us, we talk about the thing that hurts us the most as human beings are relationships, and the things that fix us the most are relationships, right? And kind of to your point at the beginning of our conversation, it's how do we communicate through those hard things versus perhaps ignoring the hard thing from a team dynamic and then just saying, oh, just push forward. Oh, we're not going to talk about, Shen not pulling her weight in this team. We're just going to ignore that and deal with it later. And the rest of us will just pick up the slack. Versus what I'm hearing you say is like, we got to come together. There's obviously a place for remote work. I work with a fully remote team, as I was telling you before. And how do we still build relationship and how do we still build connection and that powerful piece? What else did you learn in the study, Steven?
We also learned about distractions, that 30% of companies don't have any principles on how to manage distractions. And I see this with meetings. I mean, how often has somebody been in meetings or they're texting under the table or they're emailing or whatever, and we can only do one thing consciously at a time. And so the ability to manage distractions is really important, but also the worst type of meetings of all is called got a minute meetings. Those are the ones where people interrupt each other and they say, you got a minute. And people try to defer to that and say, well, they're often in the middle, but they say, sure. And they try to do something, but the got-a-minute meetings are really harmful because they're never a minute. They're never 5 minutes. They last a lot longer. Then we're like, okay, when we get back to what we were doing, where will we? It's a huge disruption. So one of the ways, there's 6 types of meetings we found that are really important for all teams to have. One of them is a daily huddle, what I would call a daily frontline, basically frontline model. And that is, the headline. But the idea is a daily headline huddle. And the reason why I say a daily headline huddle, sorry, we're just mixing up the words. But the reason why that daily meeting is so important is because it's a great touch base and it answers 2 questions. What do others need to know and what do I need help with? What do others need to know and what do I need help with? And when you bring people together and at least once a day, and you're saying that, you're now thinking about the rest of the team, which makes everything work better together. So a daily headline huddle can eliminate so many other distractions.
I love it. So we would talk about this in our work as a community meeting, and we use it for 3 things. 1, what's going on with you today, Steven, right? 2,
Yes.
what's your goal for today? 3, what do you need for help?
Yeah.
Like, and just having those kind of 3 basic things, like, hey, how are you feeling? Let's do a check-in, get you to executive functioning. 2, what's the goal for you? What's the goal for us? 3, who can you ask for help? Who can support you in getting all of that done, right? And trying to be specific about it. And we found that it builds safety in teams when we feel like we don't have it. It builds that trust and collaborative, in that you can have it not just once a day at the beginning of the day, but you can have it, especially if you're in a big organization, when you're passing someone in the hallway in that got a minute, if you do it as that check-in, you find that you stay on track and it does only take a minute, right? Versus just ignoring each other and giving each other the nod and moving on.
Well, and we're touching on something which now let's go back to the whole remote and then in person. When we're in person, we're more likely to see that person. But when we're working remote, or at least the team is hybrid, having a consistent communication business rhythm is really, really important. And so that's one of the essential elements of a consistently high achieving team. It's what we say number 7, having a consistently high achieving team. And so if people say, okay, well, I want more about that, just email us and we'll send them the 6 types of meetings that they want to have, no matter what their team is, that can really make a huge difference with the team.
Okay, so you mentioned the daily headline huddle. Can you just quickly tell us what some of the other ones are?
Sure. You want to have a weekly meeting, and we can talk about that because a lot of people make mistakes at the weekly meeting, which is a whole bunch of debriefs, and you got to have a discussion. The next type of thing is you want to have a strategic meeting. So let's talk about that for a moment. A lot of executives or leaders of organizations or teams complain that their team is not thinking strategically. Well, my comeback is, if you're not having strategic meetings, how would you expect people to think strategically? Because they're day in and day out, heads down. Strategic meetings are when you take a strategic issue, a major issue that's not going to fit in the weekly, and we talk about that. It might be 2-3 hours, could be a whole day, but it's focused on a major issue that we need to deal with. Could be a customer issue, could be an operational issue, could be a vision issue, could be a culture issue, could be a hiring issue, but it's something that's going to take a lot of brain power, and we really need to focus on that, and it's not going to work in a weekly. So that would be a strategic one. I can keep going too.
Yeah, no, I think these are really helpful for people. As I'm listening to you say that, the question that comes into my mind, and something that I ask clients to do all the time, is like, before you take on culture change, which is, the niche that I'm working in, is what are the things you're going to stop doing? And specifically, what are the meetings you're going to stop having? Because for me, there's a place for that of like, we started a subcommittee meeting. We've solved the issue of that subcommittee, but the subcommittee is still meeting and taking time on all of our calendars. And it's not just subcommittee meetings. It could be this weekly meeting. It could be these daily meetings where we don't actually do anything, though.
Yeah.
We're just sitting around. Someone barks out an agenda and off we go, right? So part of me, I'm wondering, where's the space for, how do we get rid of meetings as well?
Well, so here's what I found by working with many organizations, as I said, with the top organizations as well, and even the Marines, the Air Force. I mean, I've worked with a lot of, been fortunate enough where I've also learned, when you put these 6 types of meetings, and we can continue on with this. When you put this type of meetings in, it clears out a lot of the other meetings. For example, the daily huddle, right, that we are just talking about, that really eliminates a lot of other meetings and cleans up stuff because people have a touch point. And so that's a really important meeting. But the whole structure is, if we put this stuff in, you can pretty much eliminate a lot of the other meetings that are getting in the way. And I say this because people do often, when they hear me talk about having a daily huddle, they go, oh my gosh, another meeting? All right, we have too many meetings. And this is what I say when people complain about having too many meetings. Blaming meetings is like blaming the car for the car accident. It's not the car, it's the driver. It's not the meeting, it's the person leading the meeting to make sure it's effective. So that's really critical. Another type of meeting that we want to have is a skip level meeting. And that's where we're going to different levels of the organization. And it's not a test on the people reporting to us. What we're trying to do is see how our messages are landing with people. And we're also getting feedback. So often somebody will say to me, look, can you help us with a communication plan? I'll say, absolutely. But here's the thing. On a communication plan, we're not talking just top down. What's your plan to get feedback bottom up? And that's where so many organizations haven't thought about that. They're just disseminating information, not focused on receiving it. Skip level can really help. So it's you schedule a time and maybe you videotape it, right? Or have it taped, and then people can watch it if they're on other shifts. But it's important. And then the other thing is make sure it's short enough, right? Because if I'm doing all hands and it's 3 hours, that's a big chunk to ask my entire workforce. But so why not? So I often coach people, instead of doing them every so often and make them really long, make them more often, but shorter. And then people hear it. And also, here's the other thing. As a leader, if they're hearing our tone and tenor of what we're trying to intend, then when we say other things that they're not hearing directly from us, they actually will hear our voice and say, well, I understand that intention. But if they've never had an experience, if they don't really talk to us, if they've never seen us, then they're left up to what their imagination, or going back to what we talked about earlier, their story. So it's important based on the rate of change. I would err on keeping them shorter and doing them more often than longer, longer and then every so often.
And can that be accomplished in 15 minutes? Because I think sometimes when people hear you say, Steven, shorter, they're still thinking, great, 90 minutes, right? Versus.
Exactly.
And I'm just wondering, like, has it occurred to some of our leaders who are listening, like, if you've got something and you're clear and concise on it, you should be able to explain it in 10 or 15 minutes. We don't have to have to your point, a 3-hour or 90-minute session on it.
Yeah, and we have to understand about with today's technology and all the different usage, right? And here's a basic one. Record a video and send it to everybody, even if you can't get an arranged time. But it's much better than sending out an email. Email is a horrible form of communication. And the reason why is 90% of the meaning of a message gets carried through other than the words. So that's how human beings interpret it, as most of us know to some extent. So tone, body language, and context and other things make up the majority of how we interpret a message. So that's important, because so often when somebody's upset, they'll go to email. And I'll often say to somebody, look, if you really understand this research, that means no matter how well you write an email, no matter how many smiley faces you use, once you hit send, you've lost 90% control of that message. And who knows? And incidentally, smiley faces could be misinterpreted as smirks or whatever. I don't know, sarcasm or whatever the case may be. That's why it so often is picking up the phone, but it's really important that people see us and hear us.
Yeah. Okay, what's our last meeting type? And then I've got some questions to ask you about building thriving teams.
And people might say there are other types. There are many other types, but I'm just trying to prioritize. And the other thing is, have some social events. And what I mean is, why not have a brown bag lunch or dinner with your team or whatever? That's important, where you're not really covering so much business, but it builds that connection. So I'm not talking about, I got to go outside and play games or whatever. I'm not talking about this. But sometimes sharing a meal or some type of social event, it doesn't have to involve any alcohol or anything like that, but somehow bringing people together, because people say, oh, that's that person. I see a different side of them. Why that's so important is when we bring teams together, and again, doing the majority of the work with the leadership teams, there are questions we have everybody answer that really are a game changer to understanding somebody's life. And one of them is, what are the 3 pivotal events that have happened in your life and how have they shaped you? Now, why that's so important is people understand, oh, that's the way they are. So in social events, you're not necessarily going to answer have those deep questions, but the whole idea is that people get to know us and see us in different ways. And again, it doesn't have to be major. It could be just sharing lunch together, but share a meal, do those types of things. It makes a big difference.
I love it. Stephen, this is really helpful. I'm thinking about all the different ways in which those can be incorporated. And then I'm just wondering why, first, it's kind of a two-part question, but why does it matter to have teams, especially in the post-pandemic world, I guess, for organizations to think about thriving teams, one, and because you have a wealth of experience in building thriving teams and all kinds of organizations, what do you believe is the most crucial trait or action that a leader could take to cultivate um, a thriving team? And I'm asking that question for a couple of reasons. Is that lots of organizations are toxic. I think if we looked across it, most people would say, I work at a place that's crappy. The research kind of supports that. And a lot of leaders who are probably tuning in feel like there's little they can do because we know whoever your leader is can't change the culture of an organization. It takes everybody in the organization. And I think some people feel like there's nothing I can do, so I'll do nothing. That's the story we tell ourselves. And so I'm really curious about what's in action besides hiring a consultant, besides doing all the heavy lifting work. What's something you could just do? You could show up at work next week, start doing this, and it would begin that shift to a more thriving team.
So the number one thing is create emotional safety, not psychological safety, but emotional safety. Let me kind of back up and then explain why I'm saying this and what they can specifically do. The reason why I'm saying this is if we take on that honest communication is the most important thing that any team and organization can do, getting the unsaid said, right? We talked about. So we have to look at why don't people get their unsaid said? And the number one reason is fear. Fear of retribution, fear it's going to come out wrong, fear that somebody is not going to forgive us. And let's face it, there are people who we do speak the truth and they don't forgive, they don't move on, and they do always remember or that distorted version. So there's fear. And sometimes we've seen it where people might be disrespectful or use the wrong tone with each other or whatever it is. And I don't want to make it sound like you can't ever have bad days. But the point being is we have to create that emotional safety environment. So why I'm saying emotional safety versus psychological safety is my experience is that people can cognitively get it's okay to speak up, like I'm not going to get fired. But human beings aren't logical, they're emotional. So that's why I say emotional safety, not psychological safety.
I think that's such a big one. I love that you talked about the difference. It's like logically I get I won't get fired, but it feels like I will. Right? It's a
Yeah,
big piece
absolutely.
of that. What can you do? How do you create more emotional safety?
They think that they don't have to build it. In other words, if you have the right talent, it will come. And it just doesn't work out that way. You have to really cultivate it and do something. What can a leader do really importantly is they set the culture. Are we creating a culture where there's emotional safety, proactively saying that get the unsaid said, or not? It's like, what are we doing here? So we can't just let it happen by accident. In fact, I'm finishing up a book on scaling culture. And one of the big problems of scaling culture and why I wrote it about what to do is the problem when people try to scale cultures, they think it's just going to happen. And very often, because it's a small organization, and we do have a culture, but we haven't dissected what makes our culture great. And if I haven't dissected it, I can't duplicate it. And so it's really important to figure that out. And so the big problem that people do is they just think it's going to happen, and it doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, that's such an important one. It's sort of, you said this earlier, which is leaders don't have to have all the answers, which to me, when I hear you say that, and I'm just thinking about it, is like, you have to ask the questions. Why do you like working here? Right? Like that place of curiosity, instead of assuming why people like to work here, like, why do you like to work here? I mean, even in my own small team, and I have a very small team, it's like, what's so great about it? Like, we don't have a lot of things they have other places. What's happening here that's keeping you here, right?
Well, that's and touches on something else I've seen with great organizations. They don't just do exit interviews; they do stay interviews. In other words, What has people stay? And, very often when you ask people, why do people like working here or what's our culture? They can't really answer it. And I don't mean it's like they don't have the answers. They've just never been asked that. So their first reaction is, I don't know, I just like it. But we have to dig deep. What do you like? But I just want to say this: when people if they ever cite money, it's just not the truth. People, I'm not saying people don't want to be paid well, but given that they're somewhat reasonable, when somebody jumps and they say, I jump for more pay, unless it's astronomically different, chances are there was something else going on.
Yeah, I mean, the research tells us, right? It's results and it's relationships that make us happy at work. I think somebody told me once that a pay raise buys you another week. Pretty
I love
much,
it.
like we get the pay raise, we feel good for about a week. And then if there's problems, we'll go right back to what the problems were after a week, right? So it only buys us that little bit of time. Okay, Steve, I'm going to ask you quick fire, but first, what's the future of work? What do you see in the next few years when it comes to team dynamics and leadership? How do you see the future of work? And what do you think maybe is a challenge? And what do you think we have on our side?
Well, the biggest thing is embracing AI.
Yeah.
That's a game changer, and it's a game changer for our industry, the consulting coaching
Yeah.
business. We have now developed a system about how to have consistently high achieving teams. It's all online, but there's an AI overlay, and if they want to hear more, we can talk about it.
Yeah.
And life generally improves. It doesn't mean, listen, we have those ups and downs in life, and I understand that. But generally, anything that we're trying to resist is not a good thing. We need to embrace and move it forward.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Steven, it's been great having you on the program, but tell us, and you can come at this from professionally or personally, whatever you choose for quick fire questions. What's the book, TV show, media you're consuming that's drawing all of your attention, and why is it standing out for you? You want to be done when you want to be done, but you love it anyway.
Going, I love it, but I do love it when it's done. So,
Steven,
yes.
Thanks for joining us on the show. We hope that you'll come back again, but tell our listeners again where they can find you, where they can find the book. If they want to learn more, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So thank you for teeing this up, because a few things I want to highlight that we've talked about, that I want to offer them. First, the national study, and also that 9-step formula on how to have an honest conversation with anyone. If they email us, so if they go to justbehonest.com, and you'll see a contact thing. And if they mention your show, we'll send them the national study and that 9-step formula, which is a little mini book basically on how to have difficult conversations with anyone. So
everyone needs this book. There's nobody who doesn't need this book, by the way. So all of our listeners need to go get that book, because having difficult conversations, I think that thing that we avoid is the thing we have to come back to, right? Okay, so justbehonest.com. And what's your social media, Steven? What's the best social media to connect with you?
Oh my gosh, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, we're on it all. And I have a team of people that often monitor it, but if they ever want to reach me directly, all they have to do is go to any of those mediums and just say, hey, I have a question for Steven, and it will get forwarded to me. So any of those mediums is important. So again, Facebook, Instagram, I think we are on TikTok as well. And
for you, Steven. My team keeps saying TikTok, and I keep saying we're not adding another platform.
Well, you know what's really interesting about TikTok, and we can send this to people, is there are 3 effective questions that can break up a dialogue and move something forward. So we can send that video, but that hit almost 1 million views, and
wow.
And different from other mediums because it's just different ways. But anyway, yeah.
All right, Steven, thanks again for being on the show. For our listeners, we appreciate you sticking us through. Having Steven, our other experts on, is always great. Tell us what you think. We love to hear you. Don't forget to leave a comment, like our show. Until next time, pole, slowly, slowly, one step at a time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Steven.
Thank you.
Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.